The emergency room at St. Michael's Medical Center in Norfolk, Virginia fell strangely silent the moment the trauma doors burst open. Every monitor continued to beep, every stretcher continued to roll, but dozens of eyes shifted toward one young nurse standing frozen beside the triage desk. They weren't watching because a critically injured Navy SEAL had arrived. They were watching because they expected the newest nurse in the hospital to fail in front of everyone. What none of them realized was that before sunrise ended, the rookie they mocked would become the one person a decorated warrior trusted with his life, and the lesson that followed would change an entire hospital forever. If you believe kindness is stronger than cruelty and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that respect can save lives. 24-year-old Grace Harper had dreamed of becoming a nurse ever since caring for her grandfather during his battle with heart disease. She had graduated near the top of her nursing class, but textbooks never prepared someone for the reality of a crowded emergency department where every second carried the weight of someone's future. It was only her third week working in the ER, and despite her intelligence and dedication, she was constantly reminded that she was the rookie. Every small mistake became gossip. Every question became proof that she supposedly didn't belong. Instead of helping her grow, a small group of experienced nurses laughed whenever she struggled, believing pressure would either make her stronger or force her to quit. Leading the ridicule was Victoria Collins, a senior nurse respected for her clinical skill but feared for her sharp tongue. Victoria believed new nurses needed to earn respect through humiliation. Alongside Brian Foster and Nicole Reeves, she quietly turned every shift into another test for Grace. They would send her to retrieve supplies that didn't exist, deliberately leave confusing notes, or assign impossible workloads before criticizing her for falling behind. Grace never complained. Every evening she cried in her car before driving home, then returned the next morning determined to prove that kindness was stronger than bitterness. Late one rainy afternoon, an ambulance radio announced the arrival of a high-priority trauma patient from the nearby naval base. The report immediately caught everyone's attention. The patient was Commander Matthew Brooks, a highly decorated Navy SEAL who had survived multiple overseas missions. During a recent training accident involving an explosion, he suffered injuries that left him almost completely deaf. Although physically recovering, he relied entirely on American Sign Language and lip reading under ideal conditions. Loud environments made communication almost impossible. Victoria immediately recognized an opportunity. Instead of assigning the hospital's certified ASL interpreter or paging one of the staff members with sign language experience, she smiled quietly and suggested that Grace should handle the patient alone. She announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear that it would be an excellent experience for the rookie. Several coworkers exchanged amused looks. They knew Grace had never treated a deaf patient before. They knew the emergency room would be chaotic. They expected confusion. They expected embarrassment. Most of all, they expected failure. Grace's stomach tightened as Commander Brooks was wheeled into Trauma Room 3. The decorated officer remained remarkably calm despite blood soaking the bandage around his shoulder. His alert blue eyes carefully studied every face entering the room. Within seconds, he realized nobody was communicating with him. People spoke rapidly. Monitors beeped endlessly. Doctors issued instructions. But to him, it was only movement without meaning. Grace walked slowly toward him, trying not to reveal her fear. She remembered a lecture from nursing school about patient dignity. Communication always came before treatment. She gently touched her chest, smiled warmly, and pointed to the name badge hanging from her scrubs. Then she slowly mouthed her name. Grace. Commander Brooks looked at her for several seconds. Then something unexpected happened. His tense shoulders relaxed. He carefully signed one simple word. Hello. Grace froze for half a second. She only knew a handful of signs learned years earlier from a volunteer seminar at church. Hello.
Thank you. Please.
Help.
Pain. Family.
She responded with the sign for hello. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For the first time since arriving, the injured Navy SEAL smiled. Grace immediately grabbed a whiteboard and marker instead of pretending to understand everything. She began writing short, clear questions while maintaining eye contact. Commander Brooks answered through writing, gestures, and simple signs. They slowly built communication one sentence at a time. Watching through the observation window, Victoria frowned. The humiliation she expected wasn't happening. Instead, trust was forming. As doctors examined Commander Brooks, Grace noticed something everyone else missed. Each time someone approached his injured left side without warning, his breathing accelerated and his pulse climbed dramatically. Because he couldn't hear footsteps, sudden movement triggered combat instincts developed over years in dangerous environments. Rather than dismissing it as anxiety, Grace quietly asked every staff member to enter his field of vision before touching him. She gently placed a hand where he could see it first, waited for acknowledgement, then proceeded with each procedure. Almost instantly, his vital signs stabilized. The attending physician looked surprised. What changed? Grace simply answered that the patient finally felt safe. Several hours later, another emergency shook the department. A city bus collision flooded the hospital with injured victims. Doctors scattered between trauma rooms. The certified interpreter, who had finally arrived, was redirected to another critical patient. Grace once again remained beside Commander Brooks. While replacing and dressing, she noticed his eyes repeatedly shifting toward another room. Following his gaze, she realized smoke was beginning to seep through an electrical outlet after overloaded equipment caused wiring to overheat. Before anyone else noticed, Commander Brooks urgently signed something. Grace couldn't fully understand. He pointed, then signed again. She recognized only one word.
Danger.
Without hesitation, she alerted security and maintenance while helping evacuate nearby patients. Minutes later, electrical sparks ignited inside the wall. Because of the early warning, firefighters contained the fire before it spread through the emergency department. Hospital administrators praised the rapid response. Nobody realized the warning had come from the deaf patient everyone assumed couldn't communicate effectively. Later that evening, the hospital director personally visited Commander Brooks to thank him. The Navy officer surprised everyone again. Instead of accepting praise, he pointed directly toward Grace. Using careful signs translated by the interpreter who had returned, he explained that she was the only person who had treated him like a human being instead of a medical problem. She hadn't pretended to know everything. She hadn't spoken louder because he couldn't hear. She hadn't shown pity. She had shown respect. The interpreter paused for a moment before continuing. Commander Brooks wanted everyone present to know that during military operations, trust determined whether teammates survived. Grace had earned that trust in less than an hour simply by listening with patience instead of pride. Silence filled the room. Victoria stared at the floor. For the first time since Grace arrived, nobody laughed. The following week, something extraordinary happened. Commander Brooks returned, not as a patient, but wearing his Navy dress uniform. He requested permission to address the hospital staff during their monthly meeting. Doctors, nurses, administrators, and students gathered in the auditorium expecting a brief thank you speech. Instead, the decorated officer shared a deeply personal story. He explained that losing his hearing had been harder than surviving combat. For months, he felt invisible. People ignored him, spoke about him instead of to him, or assumed his disability made him incapable. Hospitals frightened him because communication failures could become deadly. Then, he described meeting Grace. He explained that she never treated his deafness as weakness. She adapted instead of expecting him to adapt alone. Her compassion restored confidence he believed he had permanently lost. When the audience applauded, Commander Brooks walked directly toward Grace. Before hundreds of employees, he presented her with a Navy Challenge coin engraved with the words honor, courage, commitment. He explained that challenge coins were traditionally given to people whose actions reflected extraordinary character. Grace accepted it with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. The room stood together in a long standing ovation. Victoria couldn't clap immediately. She remembered every sarcastic remark, every cruel joke, every time she tried to make Grace quit. For the first time in many years, she felt ashamed. After the ceremony ended, Victoria quietly approached Grace in the hallway. Her apology wasn't dramatic. There were no excuses. She admitted jealousy had made her forget what nursing truly meant. Years of exhaustion had hardened her heart until compassion became routine instead of purpose. Grace listened carefully. Then she smiled. She forgave her. Not because Victoria deserved it, but because holding bitterness would only continue the cycle that had nearly destroyed her confidence. Months passed. The atmosphere inside the emergency department slowly transformed. Senior nurses began mentoring instead of mocking. New employees were paired with supportive partners. Basic sign language classes became mandatory for emergency staff. The hospital introduced communication boards in every trauma room. Patients with hearing impairments reported feeling safer than ever before. The culture changed because one rookie nurse refused to answer cruelty with cruelty. One snowy December afternoon, Grace received an unexpected envelope. Inside was a Christmas card signed by dozens of Navy SEAL team members. Commander Brooks had shared her story throughout the naval community. The final handwritten sentence brought tears to her eyes. It read that courage wasn't always found on battlefields. Sometimes it wore blue scrubs, carried a stethoscope, and chose kindness when humiliation would have been easier. Grace placed the challenge coin beside the card in her locker. Whenever difficult shifts reminded her how exhausting nursing could become, she looked at those simple words and remembered why she entered healthcare in the first place. Years later, newly hired nurses often asked why the emergency department felt different from other hospitals. The answer was never found in policy manuals. It lived inside the people. They had learned that the strongest medical skill wasn't speed, intelligence, or experience. It was seeing every patient and every coworker with dignity before judgment. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends and family, and leave a comment. Your support helps us continue sharing inspiring stories that remind the world compassion still exists. Blue Heart special request. Before you go, comment with the words "Kindness always wins" if you believe one act of compassion can change someone's life forever. And somewhere in Norfolk, Virginia, a once lonely rookie nurse and a decorated deaf Navy SEAL continued inspiring others without seeking recognition. Their story became proof that humiliation may capture attention for a moment, but respect, humility, and genuine kindness leave a legacy that lasts for generations.